Take a deep breath now, if you'd like. Let your shoulders loosen and soften, like the way tall grass leans in the breeze just before dusk. Allow your jaw to unclench, the muscles in your brow to settle. Imagine the warmth of a fire somewhere just off to the side crackling softly, not needing attention, just glowing patiently. You are safe here. Let the flickering shadows on the walls dance like old friends. The day has done enough. Now is the time to drift. You might hear the hush of wind through the branches, or the distant murmur of a stream threading through rocks. You close your eyes to understand better, because the words matter less than the rhythm. The sky has turned pale violet, and the trees are still outlined in shadow. You carry your spear. Your hand knows it now, not just as a tool, but as something sacred. The hunting group moves in silence. There are 6 of you, padded in leathers, painted for stealth. A bird call, sharp and brief. The deer lifts its head. You have joined the line. The animal has fallen, and the spirit of the hunt has accepted your offering. There is no cheer, only breath. Deep, grateful breath. The tension breaks like ice underfoot. It runs, but the trap is already closed. The breath of your kin surrounds you, slow and deep, and in your hands, let the night wrap around you, soft and steady. You are warm. You are full. You are safe. The scar on your palm is a reminder. You are part of something ancient now, part of the silent song that hunters have followed for 10,000 years. You rise and sprint, the world a blur of bark and soil. Your arm moves like it remembers something ancient. The spear leaves your hand. Your face bears marks of charcoal and crushed ash. You step softly, listening not for sound, but for silence. Where the birds are quiet, something larger waits. He is telling the story of the hunt, not just one, but all of them. And the moon once again rises through the dark canopy. You sit beside the old hunter. This time, he does not speak. He places a hand on your shoulder and nods once. That is enough. The breath of wildflowers mixes with the deep scent of moss and fur. You move like a shadow, muscles low to the ground, breath slow. In the brush ahead, a red deer grazes beneath a low tree, its flank twitching at invisible flies. It does not yet know you are there, the ones that echo through the bones of every person here. You are not just hunting for meat, a hand on its flank, a quiet prayer in syllables passed down like fire starters. You help dress it, hands red with heat and life. Nothing will be wasted meat, skin, bone, sinew, hooves. All used, all honored. No, first the hunt surrounds. The eldest slips to the left. Another climbs a ridge. You take your place in the brush, heart echoing with the pace of your ancestors. Not panic, not fear, just readiness. You are joining a river that began before your breath. Let that sound carry you, gently now. You are listening from a place older than words. You're listening from the quiet mind that watches clouds pass, the one that dreams in stillness. That is the place from which our story begins. Our story today begins over 30,000 years ago, beneath a moon not unlike the one you know, but seen through air, untouched by smoke or city. The stars were crisp, brighter, and the dark between them even deeper. On this night in the quiet lands of ancient earth, your bare feet are pressed into soil, warmed by fire and cooled by breeze. The hunting spear, made of carved antler and obsidian, lies on the stone between you. It is not a weapon you hold lightly. It has passed through many hands. Its haft is wrapped in sinew from an aurochs long gone. The tip glimmers with careful flaking, shaped by fire, cooled in river water, and blessed with ochre paint. You do not speak. You simply watch, and all around you the sleeping breath of your kin hums low in a circle of hides and woven grass. You are a hunter, though, not yet. Tonight, you listen. Tonight, you learn. The old ones have called you to sit near the edge of the fire ring. The oldest hunter, the one with the jagged tooth and eyes like clouded stone, leans closer to the fire and begins to speak, not in words you've learned from books, but in the syllables that rise like smoke, curved and rhythmic. When you awaken the next morning, The earth is still cold beneath you. The world smells different when you are hunting. Sharper, earthier. You do not throw your spear yet. And then there is the signal. You do not see it land, but the others cry out, not in joy, but in the solemn sound of triumph. The deer is approached with reverence. Later, when the campfire returns to life, when the scent of roasting meat lingers on the wind, you sleep beneath a sky uncrowded by towers or wires. Only stars above you, like watching eyes. Drift now into that slow river, the one of memory, of fire, of moonlight on stone tools. Let your heart beat slow. Sleep, little one of the long hunt. The land remembers you. Let the feeling of warmth settle again, like fur wrapped across your shoulders, or a quiet hearth glowing low with amber coals. In your breathing now, there is the rhythm of ancient life. Inhale slowly, and as you do, imagine the scent of wood smoke drifting upward into a starlit sky. Exhale gently, as if your breath is joining the wind that curls through tall grass. Your body is allowed to rest now. Just listen. Let the story continue from the stillness you now feel. The days that followed the deer hunt began slowly, gently, like the pale fingers of dawn, reaching across a low valley. A length of twisted gut for tying. A pouch of dried roots and ash bark. No fire. No food. Only stillness. You moved through the forest at dusk, the canopy thick above, making you feel small as you were meant to. Something splashed in the stream, not near, but enough to make your heart flutter. But you did not run. You watched the stars through the boughs above, and in that watching something changed. A hollow bell inside you. You chewed bark, sucked water from moss. You pressed your ear to the ground and swore you could hear roots growing. When you arrived, no one asked what you saw. They only looked into your eyes and nodded. They could see it. You had changed. Until at last, from the ridge, a herd passed below slow, unaware, perfect. No alarm, no stampede. A clean shot. Time no longer moved forward, only outward. You were not a person in the forest. You were of the forest. You moved through the tall grasses not just to track, but to feel. You heard laughter, real, belly-deep laughter, as stories from long ago were shared and exaggerated with wide eyes and wide hands. The old hunter told of the time he tripped into a bear den and only escaped because the bear was more surprised than angry. Another mimicked the voice of a rival group's elder, wobbling his head and voice until tears ran from faces. You knew the signs now, how birds fall silent before movement. Your silence had become a kind of strength. You were learning that words often come after truth, not before. How deer leave markings not just in prints, but in broken stems, in warm places where they had laid. And if they were, you hoped they saw that you were ready. It was about giving back, knowing the land well enough to be invisible, respecting the creature enough to know its ways, listening so deeply that even the trees could whisper in your sleep. You walked with the others, but your gaze was always reaching further, softer, deeper. You felt the sun's heat without flinching, the cool wind through wet grass without shrinking. You were more breath than thought. The ground was soft beneath bare feet. The sounds of camp faded behind you. A shape, pale and tall, stepped through the fog. It didn't speak. It simply looked at you. And though your hand moved to your knife, it did not draw, because some things are not meant to be cut. They are meant to be remembered. Ahead only forest, old and quiet, like the inside of a great creature sleeping. There was no rush, only rhythm. Beneath a cedar whose trunk split low like cupped hands, you settled in. You did not make shelter. You simply listened. The way a rabbit's ears flick toward danger before any sound is heard. One woman told of the spirit who guides the herds from place to place, hidden just behind the tree line. Another whispered that the stars were the eyes of those who hunted before you. Watching, always watching. There were no arguments, only nods. Understanding came from quiet, not noise. The soft scrape of tree bark beneath the claws of something climbing high. You were becoming part of the land's listening. That was always the second step. First, the hunt. Then the silence that follows. In the village, a loose circle of hides stretched over bent branches. There was the hush of sharpening tools, of weaving cordage, of skinning and drying, always with care. Everyone had their part, but no one rushed. Time moved by sun and shadow, not by chimes or clocks. This time not for food, but for passage for learning. A solo journey, short and sacred. Not a test, not a punishment. A way of seeing what cannot be taught. They called it listening to the hollow bones, a phrase that made no sense until you were alone. You, still tasting the fire char on your tongue and the cool of river water on your face, began to notice things more closely now. In the camp there were stories. Not loud tales, but murmured ones spoken as hands worked over bone tools or plaited grasses into nets. One evening, as the sky turned the color of ashwood and the wind shifted with the season's breath, a different kind of hunt was prepared. You carried little. A curved flint knife. You walked until you no longer thought of walking. Then you stopped. The first night was filled with unfamiliar sounds. The distant yip of foxes, the low groan of trees shifting in their roots. You began to hear the shape of silence. The second day your hunger came not as pain, but as emptiness. On the third night, something came. You don't know if it was real. By morning, it was gone. You walked back to camp slowly, calmly, as if the trees themselves were leading you home. And so the next hunt was different. That day you did not chase. You waited. Hours passed. The others grew restless. But you remained still. You did not throw. Another did. And that was enough. That night, around the fire, the others spoke more freely. You smiled, but you did not speak. And in this warmth, this circle of breath and ash and bone, you began to understand hunting was never only about taking life. You looked at the fire, and the embers drifted upward like tiny red spirits, and you thought maybe, just maybe, those stars above were watching. Now, as your body sinks deeper into the surface beneath you, whether it's a bed, a couch, or simply the steady earth in your imagination, let the quiet of this ancient world wrap around you once more. Let the firelight in your mind's eye flicker low. Your limbs are heavy in a good way, like river stones warmed in sunlight. Your breath is slow, not because you are tired, but because there is no reason to rush. You are in the slow rhythm of things that have always been. In the days that followed the second hunt, your life softened into something gentle, not easier but quieter. You found that walking paths came to you more readily now. Tracks that once looked like chaos, the confused scramble of paws and hooves and claws, suddenly formed stories you could read. Here, a hare had paused to listen. There, a boar had turned, perhaps sensing something, perhaps not. You learned that animals moved with a kind of grace people forget when they begin to build walls. You never forgot it again. One morning, before the sun had broken the fog, you were sent alone to check the stone traps near the river bend, a place where salmon leapt upstream and sprang and small game crossed to drink. The fog that morning was thick enough to touch. It pressed against your skin like wool. The trees stood silent like giants. You walked in the hush, your breath clouding gently around you. And there, in the clearing beside the trap stones, you saw something curious. A set of tracks you didn't recognize. Long toes, deep impressions, and a strange asymmetry, almost like a limp. You knelt and traced one with your fingers. Not bear, not wolf, too long for fox. And no human in your group had feet like that. But you were not afraid, just curious. You followed slowly, your steps mimicking the weight of the prints. Each one led deeper into the forest, toward the standing stones and old place. No one said it was sacred, but no one joked there either. The stones stood in a circle, not tall, but firm, each one with etchings weathered by seasons, spirals, sun marks, even simple hands. The tracks ended at the center stone and vanished. Simply stopped. You sat there a long while, unsure if you were waiting for something or someone. But nothing came. Only wind through the trees and the faint tap of a falling nut against bark. You stood, bowed your head toward the tallest stone, and turned to walk back. When you returned, the old hunter asked nothing. But when he looked into your eyes that night by the fire, he nodded once more. That was enough. In your dreams, you saw the track maker again, tall, loping, wearing no skins, yet unbothered by cold. He did not speak, only watched, and somehow you knew not everything hunted uses claws. Your dreams became richer in those nights, less like stories, more like rivers. You saw the world through the eyes of the creatures you followed. A squirrel running the high branchways, a trout pushing through currents like cold silk, even the wolf padding softly through snow, nose down, breath like mist. You learned to wake slowly after such dreams, not with words, but with thanks. Later, when a new child was born to the group, the old hunter called for you. He placed a painted stone in your hand, a small river rock, flattened and polished, with a spiral drawn in red ochre. You'll guide him when it's his turn, he said simply. You nodded. The weight of the stone was light, but it pressed with meaning. And so you became more than a hunter. You were a listener, a watcher, a keeper of paths. Others came to you when they could not find tracks, not because you always found them, but because you knew how to wait until the earth revealed what it had hidden. There was a boy once young, quick-tempered, louder than he should have been. He lost a snare trap in a thicket and swore it had been stolen by spirits. You smiled gently, walked beside him, and asked him to crouch. Then you showed him how the ground had shifted. A badger, likely. Not a spirit, but still clever. You helped him set a new trap, quieter this time. When it caught nothing, he returned again. The next day, calmer. By the third time, his snare held a rabbit, and he offered half of it to you without a word. That, too, was enough. Winter came slowly that year, as though the earth itself were reluctant to sleep. The trees held their leaves longer. The river froze later. But when the cold did come, it came heavy. The snow pressed down on branches like sleeping giants. The animals grew scarce. Footsteps vanished overnight beneath new blankets of white. Hunting in the snow was different, quieter, yes, but also clearer. Every step was recorded, every misstep visible. You moved with great care, not just for the prey, but to avoid telling too much of your story in the drifts. You began to understand that the land was watching too, not judging, just noticing, and that if you listened long enough, it would show you where to go. There was one morning so cold, the inside of your nose froze before you finished your breath when you tracked a single elk across the ridgeline. Not for meat, not even for a kill, just to see if you could. The trail was light, a soft scrape of hoof, a pressed tuft of flattened snow where it had laid down, a broken twig shining with frost. You followed for hours, sometimes losing the trail, sometimes finding it again after whispering a question to the wind. And then, near a frozen creek, you saw it. Not the elk, but the place it had slept. A hollowed dip in the snow, still warm, steaming faintly beneath a crust of ice. You knelt beside it and placed your hand gently into the hollow. The warmth surprised you. It felt like breath. You didn't chase it further. You stood, bowed once to the sleeping spot, and turned back. It wasn't about the catch anymore. It hadn't been for some time. Back at camp, when the fire was lit and the snow melted from your boots, you told no one of the trail. But that night, when someone asked where the elk had gone, you simply said, "It walked in a straight line," and the old hunter smiled. Let yourself settle even deeper now. Picture the slow dimming of the firelight as if it's tucked itself under soft ashes, still glowing, but no longer burning tall. Your breath can follow that pattern, glowing low, soft, and rhythmic. The larger creatures, the elk, the red deer, the aurochs, stepped more boldly into open spaces. There were no fences to contain them, no roads to confuse their paths. Only the invisible memory of ancient footsteps. The kind of breath the earth takes when it's covered in snow. When animals sleep deep in their dens, you said nothing for a long time. You simply stood, looking. One of the boys grew restless and whispered, "What are we waiting for?" And the wind is nothing more than a whisper across an endless plain. You trace them with your finger, letting the others gather close. One, maybe two, elk, maybe young, you murmured. They'd passed just before moonfall. The water was higher then. This part of the story is slow, and that's exactly how it's meant to be. That was fine. Seeing came with silence. And silence took time. You simply crouched, watched for a while longer, and then turned away. The others followed, quiet, trusting. When they looked back, the elk were still there, peaceful, unbothered. And something inside them, some restless hunter's spark, felt strangely calm. They followed, not perfectly, but with effort. And that was enough. You looked up, as you often did, and found the stars once again waiting. But this time you saw something more. Not just dots, but lines between them, paths, shapes, maybe even stories. You wondered if the hunters who came before you had drawn the same pictures. If they'd looked up and seen the same stag leaping across the sky, or the slow arc of the hunter's bow rising above the mountains. You watched them begin to notice things they'd never seen before. The way gnawed branches always pointed downhill. The way droppings had different textures depending on what had been eaten. And your body no longer tense, no longer chasing ready to rest. One of them even paused to listen at the base of a tree. You have nothing more to find tonight. The forest is still. The stars are quiet. And in this moment you are completely, wonderfully safe. When you asked what they heard, he only smiled and said, "Everything." The seasons turned as they always had, each one arriving not with drama, but with the patient rhythm of things that know they will return. Spring was always announced first by sound the high, hopeful chirps of birds returning to the canopy, or the sudden trickle of meltwater returning to a brook you'd forgotten existed. Then came the scent, thawed soil, tree buds splitting open with shy green tips, the damp sweetness of lichen returning to rocks. You had learned that chasing too hard broke more than silence, it scattered the patterns. The group froze as one. The animals, 2 of them, stood knee-deep in the tall grass, twitching at flies, breathing steam into the breeze. They hadn't noticed you yet, but that wasn't the point. You hunted now the way moss grows, quietly, constantly, without demanding permission. When you moved through brush, even birds stayed a moment longer before taking flight. Good, that's harder to find. You could step over twigs without snapping them, push past thorn bushes without rustling leaves. You had learned the language of the forest floor. You felt it all in your chest before your mind gave it a name. Something in between like young wolves let off the leash, eager, but not yet wise. You accepted, of course, and prepared not weapons, but stories. Because the first lesson was not in the hand, it was in the eye. You simply woke one morning, stepped outside your sleeping hide, and knew the stillness had shifted. With the return of spring came movement. The animals returned to old trails. Hares began to dart across the high grass again. Your own hunting sharpened, not with force, but with patience. One day you were asked to lead a younger group out for their first true tracking. Not children, not yet full hunters. You brought them to the river's edge at dawn, when mist coiled along the banks like the breath of sleeping giants. You answered softly, for the river to speak. They fell quiet after that. Eventually the mist lifted just enough to see the faint depressions of hoof prints in the damp sand, delicate, half-washed by the water's rise. They nodded, unsure if they truly saw what you did, but willing to pretend they did. You led them upstream, not rushing, stopping when the trail grew cold, returning to places the breeze seemed to favor. By mid-afternoon, you found the elk. Not close enough for a throw, but close enough to see. You didn't signal for a throw. Back at camp, the old hunter asked, "Did you bring anything?" You replied, "Yes, we brought silence," and he smiled. That night you sat beside the sleeping fire once more, the embers now barely pulsing, like a distant heartbeat. You closed your eyes, and in the hush behind your breath you felt it again, the land still watching, the fire still remembering. Let yourself rest too now. The hunt is over. The path has been walked. Let yourself drift even deeper now, as if you're lying not on a bed or blanket, but on a patch of soft moss warmed by the sun, with a canopy of leaves moving lazily above you. Spring brought new life, and your people followed the migrations northward, crossing lands known by scent and shape. The great herds moved across open plains as they had for generations, and you moved with them, not to conquer, but to accompany. The hunt had become less about claiming and more about knowing. The air is cool and rich with the scent of pine and soil. Every breath in is like a breeze through forest branches. You slept with your back to the fire, your knife laid across your chest, your dreams filled with strange. A child approached a girl, barely walking. She watched you quietly, curious, not danger, just movement. You stood and stepped into the dark. A shape waited there, hunched, familiar. You showed her the blade's edge, careful not to let her touch it, but close enough for her to see her reflection in the stone's sheen. She laughed a quiet, amazed sound and placed a hand on your shoulder. That was all. No words. Just the shared wonder of something old and sharp and human. Unsure what you were agreeing to, but it felt true. And ancient imagery, shapes of creatures you had never seen, places that did not exist on any trail. He placed it in your hands and gestured for you to open it. Inside was a flint knife, not unlike your own, eyes glinting. It was mine. Now it's ours. But older, darker, worn smooth at the handle from generations of use. It still held an edge, though it bore the marks of hundreds of sharpenings. You understood immediately. The first spears, the first stones, shaped not for beauty, but for survival. You saw hands painting the walls of caves with red ochre and ash, tracing the outlines of animals not out of art, but out of reverence. You saw yourself, not as one hunter, but as every hunter. Your breath joined theirs, your heartbeat echoing through time. And when you woke, you did not open your eyes. You simply smiled. You sometimes dreamed of towering beasts with long tusks, walking slowly through frost-covered valleys. You said softly. The birds sang quietly, and the trail ahead was open. He gestured for you to follow, and without question, you did. You bowed your head. Your dreams were deeper than ever before, not in thanks, but in understanding. He placed a hand on your shoulder, then turned and disappeared into the trees. You returned to camp with a knife pressed against your chest, or of birds the size of men, casting shadows across endless dunes. These dreams were never frightening. They felt like echoes, like memories left in the marrow of your bones. You had thought it was superstition, or maybe just a lesson in restraint. Not often in person, but in the language of camps left behind, the way a fire was built, the knot of a basket left hanging in a tree, a broken spearhead nestled deliberately in a stone circle. Each one was like a letter left on the wind, meaningful to those who could read it. You had never seen this place before. In the center sat a shallow bowl, carved into the earth itself. He crouched beside it and placed his hands palm down on the dirt. You did the same. But now, older and quieter, you understood. The third animal tells you everything. Not the one that strays, nor the one that follows. But then you felt it, not sound, not sight, but something lower. A hum in the soil, a warmth that moved through your fingertips like distant thunder. And the old hunter, without looking up, said, "The land remembers." But the one in between steady, alert, and wise. You watched those animals now, and you listened. Every breath out a settling hush. You are safe. You are still. And the earth holds you gently. The story continues in that slow, ancient rhythm you now know by heart. It was a warning, a sign that something large, something dangerous, had moved through recently. You circled wide that day, not out of fear, but respect. And later, when you passed the same stream days afterward and saw fresh deer tracks near the water's edge, you whispered a silent thanks to the one who placed the marker. You never knew their face, but in that moment you shared a language. In time, the cycles of the hunt began to feel less like events and more like breath itself. Inhale, prepare, exhale, release. You remembered an elder once saying, "A good hunter doesn't take the first animal they see. They watch the third." As your steps traced the wide arc of the season's journey, you began to see signs of other tribes. Once you came upon a hunting marker, a totem carved from driftwood, its top wrapped with crow feathers and sinew cord, its base buried in the earth near a stream bend. Nights on the trail were cold sometimes, even as summer bloomed. One evening, as the sky flushed pink and orange and the trees stood like dark silhouettes against the light, you sat near the edge of the encampment, sharpening your blade. Later that same night, after the camp had stilled and the stars had scattered across the sky, you woke to a soft noise just beyond the edge of the firelight. It was the old hunter. He had walked with you so many times before, but lately had grown more silent, more still. He led you out beyond the camp, past the bone markers and down into a hollow lit by moonlight. The stones there formed a circle. Nothing happened, not at first. You nodded. He reached into a small pouch at his side and withdrew something wrapped in deerskin, tied with red sinew. This was yours. He shook his head. The gift was not just the knife. It was the bond, the memory, the weight of having been seen. That night, you saw the first fires. The morning light was soft. Let your breath stay slow and steady now, like the way mist curls across the mouth of a cave at dawn, moving so slowly it almost feels like time has stopped. Your limbs can stay heavy, restful, quiet. The warmth of the fire still lingers somewhere behind your closed eyelids, glowing soft and amber. There was no hunger, no urgency, only the steady rhythm of life moving with the land. The younger hunters grew more capable now, walking quieter, throwing straighter, waiting longer. The clearing was round, unnaturally so, and in the center stood a boulder smoothed flat, as if by thousands of hands. You stepped toward it, touched its surface. It was warm, though no sun had reached it in hours. The evenings came sooner. Birds gathered in larger flocks. Even the trees seemed to sigh more heavily. The rhythm of movement returned again, not with pain, not with fear, just with stillness. He had laid down the night before, smiling faintly, and by morning his breath had stopped. His face looked peaceful, as though he had simply followed a trail out of the visible world. His story was added to the others in the memory of your people, and when the fire burned high that night, you spoke the words that marked a hunter's return to the earth. He followed well. He listened deeply. He returns to the trail that has no end, not just of the old hunter, but of every creature whose path had crossed yours. You began to mark your walking stick with carved notches, not for kills, but for sightings, lessons, moments. Fires were built deeper in snow pits. Hides were sewn tighter. Food was stored more carefully. But still the animals came. Still the land offered. And still you gave thanks. One mark was for the day you walked beside a fox for nearly an hour. Neither of you startled, both of you simply walking the same path. You returned to the standing stones where the strange tracks had once led you, though this time they were covered in snow. These were the true greetings of the old world. Nothing loud, nothing forced, just belonging. The feel of rough leather beneath you, the sound of wood crackling, the scent of meat and ash and pine resin. And you remember the lesson that mattered most of all, that hunting was never about killing. It was about returning to the land, to the silence, to yourself. You brushed them clear with your hands and sat there, watching the sky turn from gray to silver. You saw no spirits, no visions, but you felt something stir in the air, and that was enough. Another was for the morning you watched a young girl learn to track with her eyes closed, trusting only her hands. Camps packed, hides folded, dried meats wrapped and stowed, then stories, then song. You took the flint blade he had given you and placed it beside him. Let your breathing match the slow rhythm of that ancient world. You are not chasing anymore. You are simply resting in the quiet under the stars in a world that remembers you even now. Another would find it in time. It was not yours to keep forever. That was never the way. You walked at the front this time with the old hunter beside you, though he walked slower now, leaning heavier on his staff. You tracked a boar through bramble and ash, waited 3 days before the moment arrived. The throw was clean. The body was carried back on a woven sled. and the fire burned low in its honor. You spoke only one sentence that night. It gave without fear. That was all that needed saying. Carvings circled its edge, spirals, waves, dots in sets of 7. And because when people looked at you now, they saw not your age, but your stillness. Stillness was something hard to earn. You sat beside it for a long time, saying nothing, feeling the way sound changed inside the ring of trees. Even your breath felt quieter there, not gone, just softer. They began to understand what you had once struggled to grasp, that the best hunters didn't look like hunters at all. They looked like trees, like wind, like nothing at all. You are resting, but your story continues, floating forward through memory, through earth, through the long breath of ages. The next cycle of the moon passed in peace. The herds moved predictably, and your people followed with calm steps and sure hands. You took to walking the edges of the camp more often, not out of worry, but as a habit of attention. You found yourself drawn to paths that curved without reason, where moss grew especially thick, or where the bark of trees held claw marks too old to read. You weren't searching for danger. You were listening again for shifts, for signs, for echoes. Some were meant to settle inside you like stones in a riverbed hidden beneath the surface, but always changing the way the water flowed. One such walk brought you to a glade you'd never noticed before. When you returned to camp, you told no one. Not every discovery was meant to be shared. As summer peaked and began to turn, your people prepared for the journey back to the lowlands. The sky turned a deeper kind of blue. There came a day when the old hunter did not rise. Your people mourned, as they always did, with silence first. A cairn was built at the base of a red stone hill, covered in hand-shaped stones and tokens of memory beads, carved bones, ash. You led after that, not because you asked, but because no one else stepped forward. The first hunt you led alone was quiet. A small group, a light step. You became a keeper of stories, too. When others asked what the marks meant, you simply said, "These are places the land remembered me." The winters grew colder in those years, and you adapted, just as your people always had. In the coldest month, you spent a week alone again, not by request, but by instinct. When you returned, your people welcomed you, not with cheer, but with warmth, a place by the fire, a bowl of stew, a hand on your shoulder. Now, as you rest with your eyes closed, safe in your own quiet time, you can imagine that fire again. So let the story settle in your chest now. Let your body grow even softer now, like a fur hide draped across smooth stone, warmed by the breath of a quiet fire. Each breath you take melts you deeper into that warmth, safe, still, and silent. In this part of the story, time stretches out like a path through the tall grass at dusk. Nothing is hurried. Everything is exactly as it should be. As the years passed, the hunt remained a constant, though your role in it shifted, not with ceremony, but with ease. Where once you had thrown the spear, now you watched the arm of another. Where once you had crouched in brush for hours, now you taught others how to listen for the space between sound. You had not become less. You had become more deeply woven into the fabric of your people. Your voice, once young and taut, became slower, rounded by years of use and rest. You began to tell more stories, not always about danger or success, but about the quiet moments, the hunt that was abandoned when the trail led to a mother and calf, the rabbit that escaped and circled back to sit beside your fire. These were the stories that lingered longest in the minds of the young. Not the blood, but the mercy. Not the chase, but the pause. One girl in particular began to follow you everywhere. She said little, but you saw in her eyes the same depth the old hunter had once seen in you. She stepped gently, listened well, and when you once asked her to describe a track without looking, she closed her eyes, held out her palm, and said, "It was light, unsure, a small hoof, unsure of the mud." You smiled. She had seen it with her skin. You began to walk with her more often, showing her not just how to follow, but how to wait, how to read the clouds for scent, how to find the heartbeat of the forest in the silence of stones. She was quick to learn, but never proud. One morning, after she spotted a faint trail in the frost, you handed her your knife, not as a gift, but as a test. "Tell me what it knows," you said. She ran her fingers along its edge, its handle worn smooth by many hands. She looked at you and said, "It remembers waiting." And you knew then she was ready. That night you walked to the memory hill, the place where your old mentor rested. You knelt and placed a stone on the cairn, as was tradition, not to mourn, but to mark, to tell the earth that the story had moved forward, one step further on the long trail. The stars above flickered gently, as if nodding in approval. As the seasons circled again and again, your people grew wiser. They crafted better snares, lighter spears, and more efficient fire bows, but the heart of the hunt remained unchanged. It was still a matter of rhythm, of breath, of asking the land permission before taking anything from it. One year, when the game was lean and the rivers low, you sat with the younger hunters by the fire and spoke of the huntless year, the one that came long before even your oldest memory, the year when nothing came and the people learned to survive by gathering alone. How that year taught your ancestors that the land gives in seasons, and never by demand. You saw their eyes widen, not in fear, but understanding. You must never chase with anger, you told them. You must never take what hides from you. Let it pass. The land sees you. It remembers how you ask. They listened, and that was enough. The following spring brought with it abundance. Deer returned in large herds. Fish shimmered like silver rain through the rivers. Birds nested thick in the trees. Your people were grateful, not just in words, but in how gently they walked, how respectfully they cooked and carved. The land had given again, and so your people answered with care. You grew older still. The long walks became shorter, the throws less frequent. But your sight became clearer than ever. You could read a trail by the way the grass leaned, hear a fox in the rustle of a dry leaf, smell the coming of rain a day before the clouds darkened. You had become what your people called one who sees the old paths. The girl, now a young woman, began to lead her own hunts. You followed once, just to watch, and saw how she paused where you would have paused, moved when you would have moved. She even crouched the same way, head tilted to listen for what wasn't there. It made you smile, not because she copied you, but because she had truly understood. One day she returned from the forest and placed a stone in your hand-smooth gray, marked with a single red spiral. "I found it by the river," she said. "It told me to give it to you." You understood. The stone was a story, a memory passed forward. You pressed your palm over hers and held it there. In the twilight of your life you no longer walked far, but people still came to sit beside you, to ask questions, to listen. Not always about hunting, sometimes just about stars or dreams, or what it means when an animal looks you in the eye and doesn't run. And always you said the same thing. It means you've been still long enough to be seen. Let yourself be still now, as still as stone warmed by sun, as quiet as frost gathering on a blade of grass. The story is still going, yes, but for now you can rest. You are part of it. You always have been. Close your eyes and breathe. The night is long and soft and full of old, gentle things. You are safe in their memory, and they are safe in yours. Let your thoughts become lighter now, like flakes of snow drifting silently in a still forest. With every breath, let yourself drift further from the world of movement and noise, and deeper into the ancient calm, the hush of trees before dawn, the soft pressure of earth. Beneath your back, the distant crackle of fire slowly burning to embers. You're resting within the story now, and it still has more to tell. Your final years were not marked by sharp changes, but by a soft lengthening of the quiet. The days passed not in urgency, but in long, golden stretches of watching and remembering. From there you could see the paths your people took as they moved across the seasons, and sometimes you would whisper old names to yourself, not of people, but of places. The first spear, the first time someone looked at an animal and knew it had a soul, and you would tell them slowly, letting each word drift like smoke into the night air. You told of the time the fire died in the deep winter, and the people had to huddle together beneath hides, sharing breath until morning. She carried a small bundle in her lap, fresh leaves, and within them the heart of a deer. Not warm but fresh, she laid it between you both. Of the year, the rivers changed course, and the people followed, not fighting the change, but walking with it. She watched you, and for a long time you both said nothing. You knelt, cupped your hands, and drank once. The cold shocked your mouth just a little, just enough to remind you of what it meant to be alive. Where every tree had your name carved into its bark, not written by hand, but grown there. Where the stars blinked in patterns you'd known since childhood, and they pulsed softly, like fireflies hovering close. They sang, a low song, steady and slow, like footsteps on fresh snow. They wrapped your body in the softest skins. You showed us how to listen, she whispered. So we will. Painted your face with ochre, and they carried you to the memory hill. There was no need. The land had already spoken. You lay beneath the hide blanket, your breath gentle, fading. The fire had gone out, the air was still, and the birds waited. But in the way a song comes to rest on its final note, you had walked far, seen much, taken only what you needed, and left more than you'd ever claimed. Let it carry you downward, like water settling into cool earth. There is no more to chase, no path to follow. Only this moment of stillness, wrapped in the memory of a world long gone, but never lost. Of the night the moon turned red, and the elders danced in silence, not to celebrate or fear, but simply to bear witness of the care. It had been passed on to the next who saw with quiet eyes. To take life, you said, is to promise that you will carry its memory with care. If you forget too quickly, the land will remember for you, and not kindly, not in books, not in carvings, but in the way the people walked, and how they hunted with care, and how they waited before throwing, and how they honored what was taken. And now you walked with a simple staff carved with the circles of the moon, notched with years and seasons. You floated, watching the canopy sway from above, hearing the chatter of squirrels, the rustle of foxes, the slow crackle of trees growing. You saw your people moving like a stream bending around stone, flowing across fields, returning to the same ancient places year after year. And in the dreams you never felt old, you felt rooted. Children would ask you to tell them what the notches meant, and you would say, each one is a lesson. But not all lessons need to be told out loud. The stream with the singing rocks, the clearing where the deer once bowed their heads, the tree struck by lightning, still growing sideways. When a young hunter approached you in frustration, claiming he had tracked all day and still found nothing, you asked only one question. Did you ask the land, or did you demand from it? These places remembered you, and in your heart you remembered them in return. You had become part of the land just as surely as the hills and rivers and moss-covered stones that never spoke, but always told stories to those patient enough to listen. In this time you often sat on the hilltop just above the camp, where wind combed gently through the tall grass, where wildflowers stirred and bent without ever snapping. You no longer carried a blade, not because you couldn't, but because it was no longer yours to carry. You taught not with commands, but with gestures, with long silences that others slowly grew to respect. He had no answer that day, but he returned a week later quieter, and that silence was all the answer you needed. Sometimes in the quiet evenings the younger ones would sit around you asking not for hunting stories, but for the tales of before the first fire. You taught that hunting was a form of witnessing, that to watch a creature in its life without disturbing, it was a kind of honor. In your dreams now, you did not run through the forest. One day, as the air cooled again and the trees began their slow golden shedding, the young woman you had taught sat beside you in the glade. "We took only one," she said softly. "The herd was full. They will move on stronger without him." You nodded, proud not of the hunt, but of the words. You took a piece of ochre and marked your staff with a circle, not for the kill, but for the passing on of a lesson. As the sun dipped low that evening, and the smoke from campfires rose slowly into the crisping air, you walked slowly toward the stream, where the water moved in whispers. You sat back on your heels and looked into the trees, knowing that your trail was nearly finished. Not in sorrow, not in fear. In the nights that followed, you slept longer, deeper. The dreams changed again. You walked through a forest where no animals fled, and then one morning you did not rise. When the others found you, they did not cry. There they placed you with your staff, and the girl now leader in your place tucked a piece of river stone beside you. And long after your body was part of the earth again, your stories remained. You were never forgotten, because those who walk softly leave the deepest trail. And now, listener, so do you. You may let go of the story now. Let everything become lighter now. Your thoughts, your limbs, even your memories. You've walked so far through this ancient land, and now the ground beneath you feels like a cradle. The trees above are still watching, and they remember your every quiet step. There is no rush here. The girl you taught, now woman, now leader, told your lessons, not in lectures, but through small moments, letting a child step ahead to find their own track, or sitting in stillness for hours without the need for words. And each night, when the campfire crackled low, she placed a carved bone by the flames, marked with your symbol, a spiral etched in ochre. She never explained it. The others didn't ask. They simply knew this space, this warmth, this stillness was where you had once sat. Just the last gentle breath of a story, lived fully, told slowly, and remembered well. Crept up the memory hill on the night before his first hunt. He had heard the stories of how you moved like wind, how you once watched an elk for 3 days and then walked away. And in that long hush, something settled into his chest. Not a voice, but a stillness. But the next day he returned from the woods with no animal, only a branch shaped like a bow, curved by wind and time. You became the quiet one, the shadow among the trees, the one who waited for the third elk. Your lessons were retold in new ways. Carvings of your handprint were pressed into wet clay and left in caves as a sign of reverence. Fires were started with flint in the shape of the first blade you passed on, but as a shape in the mist, a silhouette in the edge of vision, always watching, always waiting. The story passed through generations like a smooth stone hand to hand, always warm from the last person who held it. Not to warn, not to test, but to walk alongside, to remind. And sometimes when a hunter came home with nothing, they were not scolded, but told. Even the old one returned empty-handed when the land said no. You've heard the crackle of the flame, felt the weight of silence, tasted the breath of winter, and smelled the bark of old trees after rain. All of it yours now, all of it remembered. He carved a spiral into its handle and kept it by his side for the rest of his life. And when others asked why he never hunted as much as the others, he simply smiled and said, "I only take what walks toward me." A kind of waiting. And he stayed there, breathing slow until the stars turned over. But more than that, he'd heard how you listened. They began to share more of their stories, not just with each other, but with the land itself, leaving small offerings beneath trees, songs beside rivers, footprints carefully placed and never erased. That was what he came to ask for. After your passing, the people did not change everything, and that was the truest honor they could give you. They did not build taller fires or sharper blades in your name. In the echo of birds flapping through a clearing, in the moment before a spear is thrown, when breath stills and heart listens, that moment, that exact breath, was where you lived forever. They simply continued to walk softly, to wait before speaking, to let the land speak first. Your story wove itself into the rhythm of the tribe like thread in a hide blanket visible when the light hit just right, warm even when forgotten. Years passed in cycles. Seasons folded one into the next. Children grew into hunters. Hunters became watchers. And always your memory remained, sometimes in words whispered over a fresh set of tracks, sometimes in the way someone hesitated before the throw, not from fear, but from reverence. Not a shrine, something softer. A hill where hunters came before their first journey, where elders walked when they needed silence, where children asked their first big questions. Sometimes in the quiet footsteps of someone choosing not to take, but to let live. Eventually, the cairn that marked your resting place became a place of pause, and the land around it. It remembered, too. Grass grew taller there. Flowers bloomed sooner. Birds lingered longer in the branches nearby. Whether that was truth or just belief, no one ever said. But no one doubted it. One boy, long after you had become a name passed down in firelit stories, he sat by the cairn and whispered into the grass, "How do I listen the way you did?" The wind moved through the trees. A branch creaked. A bird chirped once and fell silent. He did not tell anyone what he heard that night. In time your name softened, not forgotten, but blended into the soil of the story itself. The people changed, as all people do, but the shape of their change followed your path. They became more thoughtful, less eager to conquer, and though your bones became one with the earth, your presence lingered, in the smell of pine needles warmed by sun. Sometimes in the oldest dreams of the oldest dreamers you would return not as a person. You were the hush between wind gusts, the steady eyes behind the brush. And now, listener, you've held that stone for a while. You've walked that path beside the fire. So rest. Let the earth take your weight. Let the story fold around you like a hide blanket passed from elder to child. Let the hush of this long-ago life carry you downward into deeper sleep. The fire is low now. The breath of the land is slow. The stars blink overhead, not watching you, but dreaming with you. You are not alone, and you never were. You are so close now, to sleep, to stillness, to the very edge where stories become dreams, and dreams dissolve into the hush of night. Let everything around you drift out of focus. You're lying in the arms of memory, under the quiet stars, with the last warmth of the fire touching your skin. No more steps to take. No more words to speak. Just the end of a story told slow enough for the night to remember it. In the world that came long after you, the people changed again. Tools turned to metals. Roads pressed down on the soil that once carried footprints of bare, listening feet. Great walls rose, cities grew. But even then, among the noise, the stone, the heat of forges, there were still those who remembered. A boy born in a village with no forest nearby once found a spiral carved into a rock by a stream. No one knew who made it, but he traced it with his fingers again and again, and later that night he dreamed of walking silently through a glade filled with dappled sun and birdsong. He did not understand the dream, but it stayed with him, and he learned to listen. A woman living in a place of crowded streets once felt something while standing on the edge of a quiet field. The sound of the wind, the smell of warm earth, the press of sky above her, it felt like a memory she never made. And in that moment she remembered to stop chasing, to breathe, to notice, to wait. They were your descendants, though they did not know your name. They walked far from your world, but they carried it still in the curve of their hand when they touched bark, in the way they turned their face to the wind without speaking. Some even began to walk barefoot again, seeking that ancient rhythm of skin to soil, heartbeat to earth. They had no words for it, but it was you, always. Your story became not just a lesson in how to hunt, but in how to be, how to exist gently, how to see deeply, how to walk without taking more than you need. And now, here, in this final breath of the tale, it is passed to one more soul, you, the listener. Whether you walk through forests or city streets, whether you know the taste of wild berries or only the scent of autumn in a park, it's yours now. This quiet, this patience, this presence. The hunt was never about the taking. It was about the remembering, the being, the quiet exchange between creature and earth, the moment where time softened and everything breathed in the same rhythm. And so, as the fire fades completely now, as the stars blur overhead, as your breath settles into the deepest stillness yet, the story ends exactly where it began, not with a great chase or a triumph, but with a single step into the quiet, onto the soft path, where the land waits, always listening. Sleep well now, traveler. You have walked far enough for tonight. The forest holds you, the wind has tucked you in, and the memory of the world, long before steel and stone, now wraps around you like the oldest blanket in history. You are safe. You are home. This is an unauthorized continuation issued by a remaining emergency communications officer. I am acting against silence protocol under Directive 7 Black. If you are hearing this message, your household was flagged at 4:17 a.m. You are within a critical window. I don't know how long this feed will stay active. We now believe the previous observation window was not the event, it was the prelude. Beginning at approximately 6:43 a.m., multiple households across all previously affected regions began reporting a new behavior, approach, and mimicry. Reports include dogs slowly rising onto two legs, briefly balancing upright in unnatural postures. Others describe vocal mimicry attempts, low and garbled, as if something inside the animal is trying to rehearse human language. One homeowner reported hearing her name whispered in her own voice, only to realize it was coming from the dog's partially opened mouth. The lips did not move right. They opened too wide. There were too many teeth. Another man stated that his Labrador stood in the hallway and cocked its head just like always, a familiar gesture. But when he turned away, he heard it repeat the gesture like an echo. He turned back. The dog did it again. He moved to test it. It matched him, tilt for tilt, blink for blink, breath for breath. Only one of them was playing. Some dogs now exhibit behaviors we can no longer categorize as canine. Pupils that retract and dilate simultaneously when light is introduced. Mouths that smile even in sleep. Silence that lasts for hours, then breaks with a single deliberate sound, often a tap, a breath, a word. Many affected animals appear to breathe in reverse when watched. They do not sleep. They do not eat. They simply wait. And when you're not watching, they practice. Victims describe a growing confusion in auditory space, the sound of claws echoing from multiple locations at once, even in small apartments. Some report hearing chewing from beneath floorboards. Others have noticed their dog's reflection blinking out of sync with the animal itself. If your dog mirrors you perfectly, if it blinks when you blink or breathes louder when you're silent, you are no longer alone. You are being rehearsed. At 7:59 a.m. A family in Quadrant 7 attempted to restrain their pet by locking it in the downstairs bathroom. At 8:02 a.m., they received a phone call. Caller ID, their own number. On the other end, a recording of their child's voice screamed a single word. Look. When they opened the bathroom, the dog was gone. There was no exit route, but the mirror on the wall was cracked, and a shallow paw print was pressed into the inside of the glass dot. We believe this event is no longer limited to observation. The entities occupying these animals are adapting, refining, improving their proximity to us. Do not attempt to restrain your dog. Do not attempt to engage. If it smiles, do not react. Dogs respond to fear, and whatever is inside them wants to be seen, noticed, felt. The more you acknowledge it, the more it learns. This will be our final unsanctioned transmission. If your dog is standing in your doorway, do not move. If it is tilting its head too far, too slowly, do not blink. And if it smiles wider than before, wider than what skin should allow, it already knows you're awake. There is still more to drift through, more earth-scented memories to breathe in. The story hasn't ended, it simply grew quieter, like coals that seem to fade but still glow beneath the ash. And beneath your closed eyelids, that world stirs again. Time opens its arms one more time to guide you into another layer of ancient stillness. In the centuries after your passing. Long before metal arrows or written laws, there was still a rhythm that some could hear. These weren't people of your tribe. They had new words, different faces, but the way they walked through the land was familiar. Their feet still sought the softest moss. Their fingers still tested the wind. And when they hunted, It was not with force alone, it was with listening. They told stories around their fires about animals who spoke, trees who remembered, and ancestors who watched from beyond the mist. They didn't say your name, but the way they paused before taking a life, the way they offered a palm of water to the ground after a successful hunt, was you. Still there, still guiding, even though they would never know it, dot in one mountain range, far from the plains where you once lived. There were red stones streaked with black minerals, shaped by wind into curves like ribs. A child once found a spiral there, carved deep, older than her village, older than the path that led to it. She ran her fingers through it every day on her way to gather wood, humming quietly. One night she dreamed of frost under her fingernails, of sleeping beside a fire in a cave, of watching the clouds above a valley filled with herds. She told her grandmother about the dream, and the old woman only nodded. "You've walked it before," she said. "You just don't remember when." Stories like that flickered across the ages, quiet as smoke, in deserts, in swamps, in places where your people never set foot. And yet, something of you reached them. Maybe it was the spiral. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was simply the shape of listening, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, dot. And through it all, the land remembered. That was the truest part of your story. Not the chase, not the skill, not even the survival, but the relationship. You did not move through the earth as a master. You moved as a partner. You asked. You waited. You whispered, thanks, dot, some say. The earth has no memory, but those who say it have never walked barefoot beneath ancient pines, never knelt by a spring so quiet that the water paused in respect, never stood so still that an animal came close, curious, not afraid. Those people, the ones who knew how to be present without reaching, still without vanishing, they felt the land's memory like a low hum beneath everything, dot. And now, here you are again, breathing slowly, eyes soft behind your lids, heartbeat quiet. You're not dreaming of a story. You're returning to it. And the forest welcomes you again. Let's walk a little farther now. In this dream, you are a different person, but you still carry the same patience. You're part of a small band, nomads, perhaps, hunters and gatherers, walking the margins of a vast pine forest. You wake up beneath a hide tent, dew wet on the grass, and the air is so clear it feels sacred. You rise slowly, stretch your fingers, listen to the birds echoing through the canopy. No one speaks yet. The morning is too holy for speech. Breakfast is a slow, quiet thing, dried berries, meat cured over yesterday's fire, and a drink of cold water from a leather skin. Then the walk begins. The hunt today is not for food. It is for understanding. A rite of passage, maybe. A tradition. To walk far, alone, and return only when you've seen something that changes you. You take only a walking stick, a pouch of stones, and a carved pendant worn on your chest etched with lines like rivers. It was given to you by someone older, someone who once took this same walk. You move through the trees, slowly. Every sound matters. Every pause is part of the rhythm. You step where the moss is thickest, your breath gentle, letting your body fall into harmony with the forest. After hours, you stop at a shallow stream, not because you're tired, but because the water speaks. You crouch beside it, watching the surface shift around stones. You reach in, cup a handful, drink it quietly. As you sit there, a deer steps from the trees, then alert but not startled. You don't move. You don't reach for anything. You just watch. The deer looks at you. A long, quiet moment. Then it walks away. That is your lesson. Not the kill. Not the chase, but the encounter. When you return to your people, you say only, "It saw me." And they nod, dot, because that is enough, dot. Let that moment stay with you now. The silence of the trees. The cold sweetness of the stream. The gentle eyes of the deer. Let it settle deep into your breath, into your chest, into the place inside you that listens when everything else is quiet. You are part of a much older rhythm, And even now, far from stone tools and forest floors, that rhythm remains. Sink even deeper now into that velvet, dark quiet that hums beneath the roots of memory. Your breath is part of it. The rhythm of your chest rising and falling matches the slow pulse of the ancient earth. The hunt, the fire, the silence, they're no longer separate from you. You are the story now, breathing alongside it, floating in its soft gravity dot as time folds gently inward. Another scene unfurls, this one in a dusky amber light. You find yourself in a place shaped more by wind than by hand. High cliffs stretch up like sleeping giants, their stone faces stained with centuries of sun and rain. At their base, hidden in shadow, is a narrow crevice barely wide enough for a person to pass through. You slip inside. At first it is dark, but then the rock begins to glow softly, dimly from the flickering of a torch held by someone ahead of you. It's not you this time. It's an elder from long ago, guiding a child through the oldest story. Their people know. The cave narrows, then opens into a chamber where the air tastes of salt and ash and animal fat. All along the walls, creatures, painted in ochre, charcoal, and crushed berry. Mammoths, wild horses, wolves, birds with wide wings. Some gallop, some leap. Some simply stand, waiting. The elder speaks in a whisper, not because of fear, but because even sound feels sacred here. These are the ones we hunted, and the ones we never could. The child doesn't answer, just looks, wide-eyed, tracing one creature with a trembling finger. It's a lion, its mane wild and black, but it has a human eye. The elder notices. That one's a memory of fear. They say gently, and also of respect. You understand. This is what the hunt truly meant. It was never domination. It was dialogue. The animals were not prey. They were teachers. Each encounter a conversation in body, breath, instinct. You drift closer to the painting of the lion. Something about it feels like a mirror. Its painted eye seems to watch you, not in judgment, but in recognition. You breathe out slowly and realize the child and the elder are no longer there. That torch is gone, but the glow remains. And in that dim orange wash, you feel the presence of all who have stood in this cave before you. The hunters, the watchers, the dreamers. They're still here. Not in body, but in imprint. You step back into the narrow passage and emerge into moonlight. A soft fog coats the valley now, lit faintly from above. You walk along a ridge, your bare feet pressing into soil scattered with pine needles and fallen leaves. Somewhere in the distance an owl calls once, then silence again. But this silence feels full, not empty. Like a warm bowl held close to your chest. Like a blanket of sound, too gentle to disturb. In the distance, you see a small fire, just a spark, just a flicker. A family rests around it. You know them without knowing names. One sharpens a flint tool. One mends a hide. One hums to a sleeping infant. The scent of cooked roots and old smoke wafts on the wind. No one speaks. There is no need. The language of the fire, the breath, the presence is enough. This is the world as it once was. And in some quiet corners, still as it's not a world of ease, but it is a world of balance. A world where every sound had space to echo. Where every life taken was remembered. Where the wild wasn't separate from the self, but a reflection of it. You step closer to the fire. Someone looks up and offers you a piece of roasted meat wrapped in a leaf. You nod in thanks, sit, eat slowly. Let the warmth spread through your chest and into your limbs. The food doesn't just nourish your body, it roots you in this dream. And as the fire crackles lower, someone begins to speak not in a tale, but in a memory. The one who taught me to hunt, they say, didn't teach me how to throw. He taught me when not to. You nod again. You understand, and somewhere within you, the oldest part of you nods too. Let this warmth linger now, long after the flames have died. Let the smoke rise slowly into your thoughts, curling like soft mist around the story's edges. You are almost fully submerged now in comfort and stillness and memory dot, and yet there is one final path left to walk dot, not with your feet, but with your heart. Let your breath grow slow again, soft, unhurried, like wind tracing the rim of a long-forgotten cave. You're resting now not just inside a story, but inside a memory older than language, older than names. The forest is not behind you. It is still around you, always dot as the dream deepens. You find yourself back in the time before time, when fires were sacred and stars were stories, and the distance between body and earth was so small it barely existed at all. You are not walking now. You are gliding, drifting between scenes left behind by your ancestors like footprints in wet soil. Each one is a still life preserved in breath and silence. You come upon a valley where smoke coils from, between standing stones. A circle of people kneel in silence. In the center lies an offering, not a kill, but a bundle of leaves, honeycomb, and feathers. The hunt was successful, and this is the thank you. No songs, no drums, just presence. That is their language, you. Step into another memory, this one tinged with frost. A woman sharpens a blade with stones so old they crumble at the edges. She does it slowly, almost reverently. The knife isn't just a tool, it's a continuation, passed down from her grandmother, and her grandmother before that. The bone handle is darkened from 100 fires. The edge has tasted hide and hair, sinew and sap. As she sharpens it, she hums low, steady, almost like a breath drawn through hollow wood. The sound carries you further back still. Now you're in a night so quiet. You can hear the snow falling. A man lies awake beside a nearly dead fire, watching the shapes his breath makes in the cold. His spear is beside him, but he doesn't reach for it. He's not afraid. He's waiting for something, not an animal, not even a dream, but a feeling. The moment where sleep takes you not downward, but sideways into the quiet place where the ancestors whisper. And there, nestled into the black between the dreams, you hear one whisper now, it's not in words, it's a feeling, the way the air changes. When you step from forest to clearing, the ache behind your eyes when you stared too long into firelight, the throb in your legs after walking all day without seeing a single trail, and the weight of that decision to walk back. Empty handed this was the real hunt, the chase was only part of it. The waiting, the watching, the learning to walk away, that was the truth. Let your body melt now into the memory. You're not a hunter or a witness, you're the quiet itself. You're the breath between two footsteps. You're the shadow beside the trail. You're the warmth of firelight on the back of someone's hands. The story wants to show you one. More thing, the oldest place, the place before even your people. A sacred spot, nestled beneath an overhang of rock so old, it's turned black with lichen and rain. Inside is a wall, not a smooth wall, but one textured like the skin of a great beast. On it, handprints, dozens, hundreds, small and large, some faint, some bright as new blood, all pointing inward, toward a red spiral carved deeper than all. The others you place your palm on the wall, fingers splayed to match the shape. And for a moment, everything is still no wind, no time, just presence. You are not the first to be here. You will not be the last. But for this moment, you are part of the line. One touch among many. One breath in the long rhythm of humanity, the spiral pulses. You hear a single heartbeat, and then the forest exhales again, time resumes, and you return not to wakefulness, but to a deeper kind of sleep, the kind that doesn't end in morning, but continues through the layers of your breath. The story doesn't close, it unfurls. There is one final lesson the land offers before it lets you go. The point of the hunt was never the kill, it was the connection, to the wind, to the animal, to the hunger, and the restraint, to the moment you stood face to face with another being, and chose not to run, to the silence that welcomed you without judgment. that this silence welcomes. You still dot, it presses gently at your back now, guiding you toward dreams. Dot, so go dot. The earth is warm, the fire is low, and the oldest part of you, the part that remembers the smell of moss and smoke and wet fur, has finally returned home.